So a very warm welcome. Hello and welcome, and glad to see you, Dinah. Hello, Professor, Vice Chancellor, sir. Thanks for being here. And so, without further delay, let me just begin. So, once again, I wish to warmly and officially welcome all of you. It's great to see that so many people have joined in such good numbers. Um, I am Shayonde, and I'm speaking on behalf of Interface, Bankura University. And today I will be coordinating and moderating this event. And it is my extreme pleasure to introduce Professor Diana Fox, who is our esteemed speaker today. And so Diana is a cultural and applied anthropologist, a scholar activist, and documentary film producer. Her work focuses on the Anglophone Caribbean, particularly Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, where she researches issues of gender and sexual diversity, women's social movement activism for ecological sustainability, women's human rights and transnational feminisms and activisms. And she serves on a number of boards, like the Caribbean Studies Association, in the International Advisory Board of the Fondus Amandus Community Reforestation Project, and many others. And as an and some of her educational activist films were produced to serve the goals while educating. Yes, I'll just request all of you to make sure that you are all muted, because otherwise the interruptions just create problems. Yes, so and she has also actually done a lot of these documentary films. One of the remarkable one is Earth, Water, and Women, Community and Sustainability. Community and Sustainability in Trinidad and Tobago, and Many Loves, One Heart, Stories of Courage and Resilience. Each tells stories of people striving against odds to protect their livelihoods, well-being, and identities. And the very interesting aspect about Diana's works, obviously there are so many more to tell, but I'll stop here. And I wish to share that there are so many interesting aspects about Diana's work is the intersectionality of her work: gender, sexuality, environment, anthropocentrism, post-humanities, and so many perspectives, elements just falls into Diana's work, which makes her work so remarkable, so diverse, and so inclusive in various ways. And it speaks to obviously her works emerge from very specific socio-cultural and geopolitical contexts, but also it speaks to so many multiple dimensions of her existence, irrespective of the place from where we emerge. So without further delay, we have a few formalities more to complete. I would sincerely request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Devnarayan Bandyopadhyay, who is the chief patron of this event and also the Vice Chancellor of Bankura University, to share some thoughts with us.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for being here and for hosting this event. I welcome Professor Fox to this interface program, and I'm sure that it will benefit many of us, our teachers, our researchers and students. And I will not take really much time because this is not my area, so therefore I will not comment on this. But I'm really very, very interested in knowing about the intersectionality of our world in future. Well, Shayan, I think you should get on with this. I'll not waste much time on this.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. And finally, I was also like to request our Honorable Registrar to share some of his thoughts, and then we can go ahead with Diana's presentation.
Yeah, good evening. This is Registrar from Bankura University. It's really a great privilege for the family of Bankura University to welcome Professor Diana J. Fox, who would be delivering her speech on feminist political ecology and we are using our unique platform interface, which is an interdisciplinary research and lecture platform for Bankura University. When I came to know about this event, out of my natural habit, I went through the websites to know something about Professor Diana J. Fox. And when I came to know about the various aspects of her work, I could understand that it's really going to be a great privilege for the family of the Bankura University, the students, the researchers, the teachers, to get this opportunity to listen to Professor Diana J. Fox, who is the University Director, Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Regional Coordinating Office, the University of the West Indies. I came to know that Professor Diana J. Fox, you are a PhD in Cultural Anthropology from the University of Massachusetts in 1995, MA in Cultural Anthropology from the University of Arizona in 1991, and BA in Anthropology Environmental Studies in 1988 from Oberlin College. As the anchor pointed out, your research and teaching interests include cultural anthropology, applied activist action anthropology, Anglophone Caribbean feminisms, Caribbean gender and sexualities, anthropology of South Asia, feminist ethnography, transnational women's movements, women's international human rights, anthropology of human, anthropology of art, anthropology of development, environmental ecological anthropology, HIV/AIDS stigma, risk and education, ethnographic, film cultural representation, indigenous art movements. You are a cultural and applied anthropologist, scholar activist, and interestingly, documentary film producer. You serve on a number of boards and committees, including the Sexualities Working Group of the Caribbean Studies Association, CSA. Importantly, you are the founder and editor of the open access online journal of International Women's Studies. Apart from the anchor, I wholeheartedly thank Dr. Kaushik Ghosh of Political Science, Shukhendu Das of English, Nirupam Hajra of Social Work of Bankura University to organize this event. I can't restrict myself from telling in my mother tongue to Professor Diana J. Fox that Apnake Bankura Bishwabidyaলয়ে অন্তর থেকে স্বাগত জানাচ্ছি, which means I welcome you wholeheartedly to the family of Bankura University. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, I would like to sincerely request Diana, the platform is all yours, and we are very much looking forward to learn and share with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cheyenne, Vice Chancellor, Registrar, other esteemed guests. I am such in an upbeat mood now with that wonderful and warm and generous welcome. It's great to see names that I'm familiar with on the screen. And without further ado, I'll jump into my presentation. And thank you for the warm and generous welcome. I am going to actually screen one of my short documentaries, but first let me share my screen so you can see the outline of my presentation. And I have some words to share first before we do that screening. So I assume you can all see me. And let me figure out how to start this from the beginning. Here we go. Everybody can hear me, I hope.
Yes, Diana, you're audible.
Wonderful. Okay, so here's an outline of what I'm going to speak to you about today. And it's wonderful to be able to talk about political ecology and feminist political ecology, because when I was in graduate school at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, I worked with Arturo Escobar, who was really developing his approach to political ecology at the time. And I've integrated it into my own work in various ways, but this talk gave me an opportunity to go back and revisit some of the main principles and the ways in which feminist political ecology served as an intervention into political ecology. So we'll talk a little bit about that, political ecology in a tiny nutshell, because it is a vast interdisciplinary field. And so I'm just going to touch on some of its main tenets. Then I will follow with some of the feminist interventions that broaden political ecology. And feminist political ecology itself has been subject to critique and to various kinds of analyses, which has led to a deepening through the lens of intersectional feminist thought, decolonial theory, and indigenous perspectives. So I'll share a little bit about what that means and how it's influenced my own work in weaving together decolonial intersectional approaches. And then we'll move on to the film screening, and following that, a discussion where I hope you will feel that you can participate and even offer some insights into your thoughts about the film and how feminist decolonial frameworks have been integrated into the film itself. And as always, I'm open to critique and suggestion. So let's begin. As an anthropologist, I was introduced to political ecology through the lens of the theory of cultural ecology. Political ecology has long roots. It was first coined as a term by Frank Thorne in his article, Nature Rambling, We Fight for Grass, which was an exploration of the competition around resource use, but then the term didn't really build any kind of momentum until 1972, when anthropologist Eric Wolf built on Julian Stewart's work, where in 1955 he coined the term cultural ecology, which had deep Marxist influences in terms of looking at the way there was competition through class organization into the use of and understanding of natural resources. I put this diagram of cultural ecology on the right to show how the ideas of cultural ecology have been instrumental in shaping political ecology, even though political ecology draws significantly from geography, from environmental science and other fields as a multi and interdisciplinary approach. But anthropology has been very central to it in the exploration of the overlapping areas between culture and ecology. In this area here, you can see in this overlapping Venn diagram, Julian Stewart was interested in the ways in which a specific group's use of artifacts, that is tools and technologies, the way people were organized into social groups, and the kinds of livelihoods and subsistence patterns, here in this case, crops and livestock, referring to pastoral or agricultural systems, shaped the impact on the environment and the interaction between the material and the social realm. After Eric Wolf revived the concept, looking at, in his article, Ownership and Political Ecology, how rules around and inheritance norms around resource use impacted on pressures by groups to make use of those resources and sustain them. There was another lull until the 1980s. And I think it's interesting to think about this timeline because the environmental movement, the global environmental movement was really in full force at this time for all kinds of reasons. But in the 1980s, then the field of political ecology really started to work in cross-disciplinary research to try to understand a number of different factors in the relationship between sociocultural life and the environment. And the key word here, the key concept that political ecologists harnessed and their intervention into the environmental movement was the idea of power. And so the notion of the politics of environmental degradation and conservation refers to politics in its broadest sense, not only with respect to governmentality and the ways in which government agencies or legislation impacted on environmental degradation, but the actual power dynamics among and between groups of people. Political ecologists also looked at the commodification of nature, its neoliberalization through multilateral lending institutions such as the World Bank, for instance, or the IMF, and the ways in which neoliberalization of nature generated unending cycles of accumulation, pressing against the limits to growth that earlier environmentalists had identified. Political ecology also explored the ways in which political, national, and even cultural borders created dispossession, issues over control over resources. And I put resources in quotations very intentionally. You'll see later when I talk about indigenous notions of nature, and of course language is restricting because even the concept of nature implies a duality between culture and nature. So language is restricting here, but political ecologists were interested in control over resources and those environmental struggles around knowledge, power, justice, and governance. Let's see. Okay, so feminist political ecology. Feminist political ecology was really advanced through feminist geographers. And feminist anthropologists came on a bit later. The work of Diane Rochelot, for example, Harcott and Nelson that I've cited here, was critical in transforming an approach of political ecologists to include gender as a significant variable in understanding the power dynamics of resource use. And as it says here, the gender relations of ecologies, economies, and politics, drawing particular attention to asymmetries. That is, who gets to make decisions about who does what work, and what resources are generated for transformation into quote-unquote commodities, what resources are necessary for sustaining basic needs, who is involved, what kind of risk is involved. As you can see here, we have groups of women pictured carrying water. Carrying water is largely a woman's and children's responsibility globally. Here in the Caribbean, you drive into the country and you can see children collecting buckets of water still where there is no tap water to be had. And women and children are at great risk for all kinds of violences, not only the physical demands of carrying water, but the long walks that stress their bodies, and the risks of violence, of rape, for example, of the trafficking of women and children that has been documented when women are on these long treks to collect the diminishing availability of water in their communities, especially in areas where there are increasing risks of drought due to climate crisis. So feminist political ecologists were especially interested in these gendered asymmetries, as well as in what is counted as knowledge, because in many places, women's knowledge is not as integrated as it should be into political realms, politics that is in its narrow sense in terms of governmentality. Many of the knowledge arenas that women have generated through their work in resource management is not integrated into political decision making at the governmental level. There are very few women who serve as water ministers, for instance, but where women do serve, the policies around conservation, for instance, or climate change are actually more advanced because women globally play significant roles in understanding and managing natural resources. Feminist political ecologists have recognized that gender interacts with many other factors. So there is, and there has been, an intersectional approach from its onset that feminist political ecologists have brought to their work. They've looked at areas of precarity, such as socioeconomic status, age, ethnicity, caste, and the like, to try to understand how these variables shape environmental management processes, and also how they position women with relationship to the struggles over resource use, as well as within sustainable development, and as noted here, environmental equality, and in social movements for justice with respect to equitable access to and management of those resources. However, let me just share this first. One quick thought that I will develop further. Even though we have seen these intersectional variables, the nature of the intersectionality has not been as robust as it could be. So we'll see that momentarily. But I wanted to share this slide here because from the onset, and to their credit, political ecologists were paying attention to the research. Not all of them, but many of them were paying attention to the research that feminist political ecologists were generating. And to demonstrate this, I went online to the Journal of Political Ecology that's been published by the University of Arizona Press, my alma mater. I was there doing my master's at the time, and I remember when the journal was launched. And on their About page, they identify, as you can see here in the italicized arena section here, that they are interested in the analysis of access to resources through the lens of race, gender, status, and wealth, environmental and social justice, feminist, materialist, and intersectional theories. And that was heartening to me to read this because it demonstrates that there has been a kind of mainstreaming of these concepts of gender, feminist thought, and social justice. However, again, we get to some of the challenges of language, because what we see in these identification of the themes that shape political ecology is that they are put into silos. They are regarded as independent lenses through which these ideas of the political economy and human environmental impacts of resource use are understood, when really they all work together. That's a general challenge that I think we as scholars, scholar activists, must take on, the challenge of not reducing analyses into silos or specific categories, but broadly understanding the ways in which these categories interrelate with one another. So if we think about the deepening of feminist political ecology and the kinds of critiques that have emerged in response to the feminist political ecological intervention into political ecology, we see that like many feminists, political ecologists in that field were reflecting on and debating the strengths of the subfield. It never gained the kind of traction on a broad scale that political ecology has. So political ecology is well known globally, but feminist political ecology is still regarded as a subfield of political ecology rather than a set of methodologies and perspectives that have permeated the whole discipline. So as feminist political ecologists have reflected on their discipline, they have identified the complexities that they must take on. Here's one example. The need to account more deeply for race, racialization, that is the construction of race and the construction of race as a category and the impact of that construction through systems of inequity, of discrimination, such as racism. So politically, what they're aiming to achieve is a more fluid and permeated feminist political ecology that incorporates at the onset notions of race, racialization, and racism in terms of their impact on the access to and management and governmentality of resources. They continue to build on the work of feminist geography and critical race scholarship and pushed again for a deeper and more complex intersectional analysis of race, gender, and whiteness as intersecting modalities of power, suggesting that by doing so, this analysis complicates the understanding of politics of natural resources and access control in the global South. And I would say not only in the global South, but clearly because many of these concepts not only emerged the concepts of racialization through the European colonial and American colonial projects, but have also been entrenched in minoritized communities and spaces in the global North. So given that, how can we deepen political ecology, feminist political ecology even more? And decolonizing, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, brings a challenge to the epistemic privilege of Western ways of knowing, the violence and authority that is asserted through Western ways of knowing, which subverts other methods, other approaches, other worldviews, such as indigenous knowledges and those other knowledges that are born from lived experiences that create their own forms of expertise. And it is important, in my view, to say indigenous science as well as indigenous knowledges, because when we don't say science, then we reproduce this epistemic privilege asserting that science had its origins in the scientific revolution in the West, which we know it did not. And what this opens up is the opportunity for us to understand the modes of systemic thought and praxis that indigenous and other communities globally have developed and designed in that influence the ways in which they interact with the living world outside of humans. And the decolonizing project then, through this process, challenges the universalizing claims of indigenous ways of knowing. It also injects a broader understanding of personhood. In indigenous knowledge systems, personhood is a concept that is not only accrued by human beings, but by all of the natural world. So there is personhood, there is an agency in all living beings, and even in what we in the West would consider to be inanimate objects. For example, in North America, indigenous peoples regard rocks as having personhood because they emerged from living substance. They are grandfathers and grandmothers and have witnessed significant transformation in the earth that is evident in the rock structure itself. In addition, in terms of indigenous knowledge systems, as I previously mentioned, the language that we use is problematic in English. It's likely that in other languages, certainly in outside of the Romance languages, the division between nature and culture is not so significant. And this is the truth of many indigenous worldviews, where culture and nature overlap, intersect into realms of understanding, ways of being, and that is evidenced in this notion of personhood that I just identified. Many indigenous groups perceive themselves to be descendant from other peoples, non-human peoples, like the eagle people or the salmon people, for example, beings that are recognized to have a fullness of existence outside of the order of human knowledge creation. And an additional element of decolonizing feminist political ecology is the idea of gender diversity through lived experiences. So feminist political ecology has needed to expand its understanding of gender by incorporating some of the insights of the feminist movement coming out of so-called third world feminisms, Black feminisms, indigenous feminisms, and beyond that, queer thought, queer theory. And so it's also, in addition to gender diversity, sexual diversity. All of these positionalities and shape lived experiences, marginality, precarity, access to power, and the ways in which human beings negotiate their lived worlds with the world of nature. I'm struggling here because I'm trying not to use the word nature, but there's very, very few other words that encompass all, I could say, our living earth. Our living earth is the concept that I'm trying to address here, and the idea of gendered knowledges broadens our understanding of the ways in which different gendered positionalities interact with our living earth through the power dynamics, access to resources, and ways of negotiating that access. So, if we build on these intersections of expanded gendered analysis, decoloniality, and indigenous worldviews of personhood, what we see, and what I've tried to do in my own work, is to develop an understanding of the gender and indigenous climate nexus, where we understand that gender equality is a central element of climate justice. We know some basic realities. We know that women and girls are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change and environmental degradation. We know that because women and children, and girls in particular, are the poorest people on the planet. We also know that they own the least resources, which goes hand in hand with that. We know that they have the least amount of political power, and we know that they own the least land. So as a result of that, with increasing climate disasters, women and children are more likely to die. Now, this doesn't mean that we ignore the precarities of various groups of men. That's important too. That's part of the gender analysis. But we also need to pay attention to the most vulnerable and to understand how we can transform their conditions of vulnerability. As mentioned before, when women are seeking resources that are scarce, they're subject to sextortion, that is sex in exchange for water, food, and other essential resources. And in terms of the ownership of land, women own less than 20%. And so after a disaster, it takes much longer for women and children to recover. And an example from Jamaica, where I'm living now, even though there are many laws on the books and international treaties that have been ratified for CEDAW, for example, the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, the Economic, Social and Cultural Human Rights treaties, and national laws as well that proclaim gender equality, still men have greater access to ownership and use of land resources. And even with the changing of inheritance laws, and this is true in many parts of the world, knowledge of those changes is limited. This is partly what we do at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, as we build awareness at a local level of the laws that exist, and also gain insight into what kind of laws need to be developed and expanded so that women have greater legal access to title deeds, etc. And we break down the social stereotypes that limit women's access to land and their ability to obtain mortgages. So given this understanding of the ways in which all of these variables work together, it is important to underscore that in any international development, local development project, in any social organizing that presses for greater inclusivity and an awareness of the positionalities of various gender identities, there is no such thing as gender neutrality. Even in projects that proclaim gender neutrality, there's always an underlying framework. And typically that framework, if there's no explicit mention of the differential access to resources or roles or decision-making power of men and women, generally without that, there is the unstated assumption of the patriarchal and patrilineal social structures in various societies. So the reason I put this slide here is to underscore the importance of the idea of gender mainstreaming, the idea that concepts of gender, that gender as a category of analysis and all of its richness through these multifaceted feminist, decolonial, and indigenous lenses must make its way into policies and approaches to improve the access to and the management of the natural world. So let me speak briefly about now pushing the envelope with respect to indigeneity and why it's so important to include indigenous perspectives. We know that indigenous peoples possess unique knowledges that form part of our global heritage. This knowledge has been historically marginalized, but through actions such as the Dakota Pipeline protest, the largest indigenous organizing protest in recent years, the world has started to see, the non-Indigenous world has started to see and understand the role that Indigenous peoples can play in environmental conservation and the importance of women's Indigenous knowledge that stems from their roles as healers and their lived experiences of marginality, power, and spirituality. I've already spoken briefly about the idea of Indigenous personhood, which must be incorporated into thinking about the human relationship with the living world, and also in trying to understand the ways in which Indigenous social movement organizing happens. And so with that being said, I want to share very briefly, and there's a lot on this slide, but this is very briefly my approach to working with social movements, indigenous social movements that are stretching feminist political ecology to be inclusive of indigenous positionalities. My approach is to work as a partner, and over the years I've worked to develop what I mean by this idea of partner, which is undergirded by a notion of equality, which elevates non-Western epistemes, and which also embraces decolonial critiques into these decolonial feminist partnerships. But part of the feminist element which comes into these dynamics in my work is a very explicit outline of the nature of the interactions that I engage in with those that I work with. That is, rather than subverting emotions, for example, which are part of being a whole person and are also part of indigenous ways of thinking, we have to think about building caring relationships and our interpersonal dynamics as part of our social movement organizing for equitable and empowered responses to resource negotiation. This involves engaging in different forms of listening and learning, talking circles, for example, thinking and writing together, engaging in respectful disagreement, engaging in self-reflexivity and self-evaluation, and thinking about principles of reciprocity that are involved in any kind of collaboration with an academic and social movement activism for feminist political ecology research and objectives. I'm about to show you the film now, but I wanted to start with this slide that shows some of the land that the film focused upon. This is the Fons Amans Community Reforestation Project. It is a landscape, as you will see, that has been reforested over a period of 30 years. In the film, when I made the film, the community had replanted over 60,000 seedlings. Now it's up to about 100,000. But what you see here are cultural markers of indigenous belief systems that were sustained in the Middle Passage during the Mafa, another word for the Black Holocaust, the transatlantic slave trade, which is a sanitizing term for the torture that took place during that passage. Ideas traveled, ideas and spirituality that are now manifested in physical structures such as the shrine or these play cards that teach persons who walk through the land about the deities from Yoruba spirituality in Nigeria that have been sustained over the hundreds of years since Nigerians were captured and brought to the Caribbean. But also it's important to note that in the period of enslavement, groups from many African cultures mixed together in the British Caribbean. In other parts of the Caribbean, such as the Dutch Caribbean, the Dutch had a different approach to colonialism where they sustained specific language groups. So in Suriname, for instance, you will find indigenous groups descendant from and claiming their indigeneity from Africa who have organized themselves in and sustained their organizing in the language groups that were created under Dutch enslavement. That is not the case in Trinidad and Tobago, a two-island nation where this Fons Amans Community Reforestation Project takes place. And the Yaba Hut is a space where there are gatherings. Yaba is an earthenware vessel of West African origin, so there's cooking that takes place in the Yaba Hut and communal eating. This is also a space where there is a climate crisis nursery where different plants are being tested for their adaptability to the increased droughts and heavy rains that are occurring less often, but in greater power than they used to with climate crisis. So let me now close this screen and share the film. And then afterwards, I hope we'll have some time for a little bit of discussion. What I would love you to do as you watch the film, there are many lenses through which you can view this film. And Cheyenne has seen it a number of times and heard how I've analyzed it from different perspectives. But I began working with Akila Jaramogi, pictured here, in 2004 when I first had a Fulbright in Trinidad, and fell in love with the space where she lives and works. But what I would ask of you as you watch the film is to think about how and whether these ideas of feminist political ecology and an expanded feminist political ecology, that is through the lens of a broader gender, indigenous, and decolonized perspective, is present in the film. Okay.
I remember the days when our rivers were pure and just full of life, clean water. But now, I see no care for humanity when these acts of insanity are being performed by you dumping toxic waste into our rivers nor seashores. Greenhouse effect for sure will take place. Our environment, please. Protect our environment, I plead.
Forests are being lost at a tremendous rate, estimated at 13 million hectares throughout the world each year. These forests provide the oxygen and water and biodiversity and wildlife habitats and everything else that we need for our survival and welfare.
There's been a cancer of deforestation throughout Trinidad. We're a tiny island, a tiny landmass. And we have witnessed, in fact, some parts of the northern range where entire hillsides have disappeared.
Water is finite. The same water we use today is the same water we had billions of years ago.
All over the world, Asia, Africa, Latin America, that, women's involvement in agriculture can actually transform a society.
My grandfather, he was from Jamaica. He was a Maroon. And I always wanted to know more about the Maroons and about Jamaica and repatriation to Africa. All these things really had me thinking as a teenager, thinking different from the normal teenager, about, black, history and struggles and so on, yeah. Later on, in the 70s, that's when I sight up Rastafari. It was just a growing movement, understanding self, understanding the Black King that came to really save us. Meeting Takuma, it was like another Bob Marley or something like that, Marcus Garvey or somebody. I saw some qualities in him, leadership qualities as well. Takuma was really a good father and a friend, a lover and everything, so losing him was really hard, but the time that we, share was really great, really, really special. The kind of conversation that we were really carrying on in the early stage, it was all about what we can do for Rastafarians in Trinidad. For me, I wanted to do more for Rasta women. For Takuma, he just wanted to elevate the Rasta men in the community, create a space where brothers can ground, carry on gatherings like freedom gatherings, bubbling food in yaba pots, beating drums and being in the bush and going to the river.
When slavery was abolished, a lot of the ancestors who were slaves got land. Land, they give them estates. Who couldn't pay taxes? The land was forfeited by the same state. Your property becomes state. So hence, these children of these parents who couldn't pay taxes, they end up living in a little shack. It's all of this bring about the 1970 uprising, the revolution in the 1970. The place have money, oil boom, and the standard of living of the little man below $1 a day.
Enough, I had enough, more than enough I say. But if they think that I go sat in a corner and cry, they damn well lie. So go on, Papa Shantwell, sing your song. Go on, Papa Shantwell, sing your song. I walk with the glory of kings. I walk with the glory of kings. Enough, I cry enough.
For Takuma, being at Fonsaman, I know he was given eviction letters from the state to stop planting and to remove all crops and so on. He went at that time to his area representative. When the rep came over and looked at the project, he said, "This is agroforestry. This should be encouraged," and that gave us some more strength to continue the work, to continue to mobilize our community, to continue to do the task to reduce forest fires. Because the community was so, I don't want to use the word underdeveloped, but it was so quiet, a lot of bush and so on, people would come from nearby and dump their garbage inside Fonsaman. And they would choose to burn. The action from uncontrolled burning eventually lead to the degradation. I was kind of fearless in addressing the situation. I say, yes, we can, that is fire, and I am woman or I am human, I can stop that. So both me and Takuma and others, we were running into fires all hours of the night and so on, trying to, reduce the degradation. Slowly the forest was coming back, but we still had challenges with human behavior. Bit by bit, we were able to convert people in the community and get them to join with us to stop the degradation. Hi, morning.
I just want you all to give yourselves a round of applause for the hard work done over the last few months, as well as for the upcoming hard work. Over a period of almost 30 years, we have planted
approximately 60,000 seedlings on this hillside. Now we can walk on the trees. Now the quality of soil is totally different. You know, now we can hear animals and create a habitat for wildlife and get fruits from the land.
I think that the Funders and Man's community is really an outstanding example of kind of indigenous self-propelled community-based eco-forestry. Also, of course, the Rastafarian ideology is one that really has within it this notion of the links to nature, the links to the environment, and very much lends itself to that protective and custodial attitude towards the land.
We plant in biodiversity style so that everything around can get something to use. So we plant trees to help with the ecosystem, and then we plant for the wildlife to bring back the animals into the forest. We plant even flowers for the birds and the butterflies, and we plant food for humans, which is like cassava. We plant yams, yeah, so we can get to eat too, and the animals can live, humans can live, and we can get rain, water in the forest.
Without a forest canopy, the water would hit the soil and be washed into the sea. When there is a canopy, the water hits the forest, and that turns the rain, which would have hit the ground, into a fine mist, and then slow drops falling off the leaves, hit the forest floor, which is covered in dead leaves and branches and complex root system, and forces the water to be percolated into the soil, which it then gets filtered through, and it goes down into the water table, where we can get it as clean water as aquifers. So this is an absolutely integral part of the water cycle, having an intact forest.
I look at certain ravines that were once dry or just had groundwater, and you can see water in the ravine now, and that's because of the forest cover. We have the Fonsoman River, and then we have some springs around the hillside that we maintain. Also set up check dams and small ponds where we can slow down water, where we can trap water in the land. We have a system where we set up to harvest rainwater for watering plants, for even drinking.
This is a community group that has taken over and taken responsibility for a portion of the watershed. The Water and Sewage Authority has the mandate or mission to provide water supply and wastewater services. By virtue of what their activities are, they are actually assisting us. The quality of the water within the upper watershed is sustained and maintained, and the groundwater within the lower portion of the watershed is now available to form part of WASA's supply.
There is a great deal of forest fire protection, not only for this immediate area, but for the neighboring areas.
During the dry season, what we do mainly is cut fire breaks. We have our fire guardians ready to address any site of forest fires or savanna fires or so on.
Over the years, we've seen how the community has transformed the hills in Fonsoman here. Now Fonsoman is at a different stage, focusing on carrying out the model to different communities, to different parts in the region, and getting the information out there, and actually teaching people how to go about doing it.
We try to educate people and show them that the importance of having a forest, the things that it do for us in terms of food, lumber, art and craft materials. So, it's a livelihood. The forest has a lot to contribute.
it's a good model to study in terms of the whole issue of economic empowerment of the people within the community.
When I plant the seeds and they grow, the beauty in it is to see them springing out leaf by leaf. It means something to me. It means that, I'm here in nature in this living thing, and it's just blossoming so well. It makes me feel like if I'm blossoming too.
I know a lot of people don't see living in the bush as something normal. After Takuma passed, it was like, are you going to stay in the bush with all those children, you alone? And I said, yes.
Like fire, burning with earth.
See it like a sacred space. I see the whole Rastafarian movement coming out of that, wanting to go back to Africa, wanting to understand self, working and living in harmony with one another. And for me, being a Rastafarian, it was all about finding a space to be free, being able to wear my locks and just, dress how I want to dress. Walk in the moonlight, just connect with nature, connect with the animals, walk in the rain naked, like away from the house, just up in the bush, and if rain falling, I can just do what I want. And this guy's waiting on you. And the space I create for my children, let them understand that the earth is special, the land is special, the land is true wealth,
Is that there's lots of people who turn on their taps and there's nothing. And they even don't necessarily realize that it's because of poor practices in other parts of the country or sometimes in their own community. And without water, your community is going to dry up, literally.
There are many countries where people just believe, we have too much rain this year or there's too much snow, when in truth and in fact, when you look at all the data, it is clear that changes are taking place and we need to prepare ourselves.
Flooding became the reality throughout many countries of the Caribbean due to deforestation. It's now the new norm.
Climate change affects a lot of people in the developing world. And if we do experience sea level rise, it's going to affect people in terms of literally where they live. If temperatures continue to rise in terms of the sea temperature and fish stocks continue to be depleted, not only will people have nowhere to live, but they'll have less food to eat.
Sadly, the built environment has now become the main thrust in terms of physical development. So infrastructural development requiring the use of the minerals that lie under the forest, so that we're seeing an epidemic, I'd say a cancer of deforestation facilitated by physical development in our country.
In some cases, you see where greed overpower need, and they just go in and do what they want, cut down forests, build big buildings and stuff, and just destroy the natural environment without a care. I don't want to see my work go in vain. I don't want to see this 125 acres of land that we have been managing over the years, and some rich person come and buy all the land and just cut down everything, and I don't want to see that.
government could take it from us and they could sell it to the developers the same way. And they could come in and build their big high-rises and condos, and at the end of the day it will boil down to money. And that is what we're trying to avoid, because we know any development that happens in here, it will destroy that river. And it's going to destroy this whole ecosystem, because this river is the main water source for the ecosystem.
One of my greatest wish is to have Fanzaman be protected, that no one can step in and take away this community. I want my children to grow up in this community because I was raised in this community.
These types of projects could be the future of the region.
We need to start taking care of the planet, because the planet can live without us. We can't live without it.
You need to have the schools on board, the agencies on board. You know, if you say you want to have this green economy and everybody going green, then it can't just be in the bush, you know? It have to be in the office, at the schools, at the homes, you know, and to have that sort of approach where everybody is on board. So the only time you don't litter is not when you're in a nature resort. You know, you don't litter everywhere. You don't litter all the time, you know?
Wherever people are living, if they look around and recognize the watershed that they live in and start to identify with it personally and start to feel the other beings, the rivers, the streams, the trees as their own family, then we would make a big difference.
For me, putting out 30 years, Takumanai and the community, bringing back this watershed, caring for this watershed, it's deep. Environmental destruction affects all mankind. Cherish Mama Earth is my plea. Cherish Mama Earth. Love Mama Earth. Save Mother Earth.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'm going to turn it over to Cheyenne now for leading well, I hope we can have a conversation. Cheyenne, did you want to have any questions, or I'm happy to lead a discussion too. I hope that you saw some of the themes of an indigenized, decolonial, feminist political ecology in there. I would love to hear your thoughts, your ideas, your questions. I think Cheyenne lost his connection. I don't see him here. Well, let me just point out a few of the areas where some of the, here's a question. How is material feminism related to feminist political ecology? Well, material feminism is, I think, evident. I could address it through the lens of the film, but of course, feminist political ecology is interested very much in women's access to resources, how women perceive and understand the natural environment, the ways in which they negotiate access to resources, control over resources, management of resources. And here, again, using that word resources seems problematic to me. When John Stolmeyer spoke, the man who explained how the forest, restoration of the forest contributed to the restoration of the water table and the flowing Fundsman's River, you could see how the very intentional actions of Akila and her team transformed the environment, transformed the materiality of that location. And it's very interesting to me to think of, when you hear the representatives of the state who are speaking, the way that the kind of contradictions that exist, the way in which the representative from the Water and Sewage Authority talked about how this is a community group who's contributing to our own supply. That's a very clear statement of ownership of water. And even though it's a public company, what it does is it places the work, all of that work that Fundsman's community is involved in terms of a resource of the state. And then, of course, you have the state that is threatening the community with, now that the land is so much more valuable in terms of the possibilities for reclaiming that land for exploitation of resources. So I think that feminist political ecology here, with its attempt to understand the dynamics of gender roles, the meanings of that are negotiated, the different understandings from different positionalities, and the way in which those understandings and the work surrounding it gives rise to different competing interests in the land and the materiality of that land. It's very evident to me. I hope now it is to you too.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Fox. Actually, I have another question. Actually, there is a saying that politics of ecology and ecology of politics. So, how do you define that? There's a saying.
The saying, I didn't quite get that. What is politics? I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Politics of ecology and ecology of politics. The phrase politics of ecology. Yeah.
Okay. Well, as an anthropologist, I think of politics in its widest sense, in terms of the dynamics of power and the negotiation of power relationships across all sectors of society. So politics in its narrowest sense, of course, refers to government and governmentality, but in its broadest anthropological sense, it refers to power dynamics. And so what we see in this film, and I think in feminist political ecological work, is the way in which different groups of people, different individuals, and different institutions navigate their interests in the harnessing of resources for whatever their agendas are, whether it's a one that protects and sustains the web of life, or whether it's one that commodifies nature into capitalist production and distribution. So these are the constant struggles, and that's why there's a kind of undergirding Marxist influence here, or feminist socialist influence here in feminist political ecology, because it pertains to the power dynamics of those natural resources and what happens to them, and how they are structured and disseminated through the meanings and the power dynamics that exist on the ground. So politics is power at all levels of society, from the individual embodiment of it or marginalization to in the human relationships from the household all the way into its macro levels.
Thank you very much. Big love from Milon Mundal, a researcher from the Department of English, Bankura University. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mandal.
Thank you so much, Milon, for your questions and interventions. And also I wish to say sorry because I just got dropped out for a few seconds because of network issues. I mean, I just want to share, Diana, that this was once again a powerful, very powerful lecture. I mean, obviously, it's important to admit that I have heard this lecture a couple of times. I've seen this documentary already a couple of times, but it never feels that it's old, or it never feels that I'm repeating something because, and as you rightly mentioned prior to the documentary, that every time we see this documentary, every time it feels that there are always new perspectives, new dimensions that appears through that work, because the whole project and the different kinds of work that you do are so intersectional in nature. And that speaks so in deep entanglements, both to the natural environment and the humans. And it's very difficult to do those usual mainstream segregations, and which are also very problematic. I know there will be a lot of questions, and in case if you have any further question, please feel free to drop the question in the chat box, or simply just raise your hand and unmute yourself and speak and engage with Diana. I'm sure she'll be very happy to engage with you. But prior to that, I wanted to just ask you a question, Diana. And this question is more on the element of methodology, which also you talked about, quite reflectively in one of your slides as well. I'm just curious to know, and this methodology is centered specifically in the documentary that you showcased now. Obviously, we already had these conversations in the past, but still as an extension of that conversation, that you, by your roots, let's say by your cultural roots or geographical roots, you are not very centered or not a part of the community. And it's understandable by now that you share a very, very strong emotional and cultural relationship with this community, with its members, in terms of your research, in terms of at the personal level, at the official level, and various other spaces. At the very beginning, when you started first interacting with this particular community, what were some of the tensions that you encountered? What were some of the challenges that you faced? What were some of those elements that you kept at the back of your mind when you walked into their community space to engage with them, to interact with them, so that they don't feel that you have just come to collect data and run away, but you have come there to learn with them and try to understand their work and try to engage with their work as widely as possible? If you can slightly reflect on that.
Sure, absolutely. That's a good question. It's an important question because it brings us to the heart of what it means to be a decolonial scholar. And I call myself a decolonial feminist anthropologist, which is fraught because anthropology's roots are in colonialism. As I briefly mentioned, I first met Akila Jaramogi in late 2004, early 2005 at a Caribbean Water Network conference. I was, as noted, a Fulbright scholar in the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, one of the units, and I'm now the director of. And I was tasked with conducting ethnographic field work in a number of different communities, urban, peri-urban, rural, to try to understand the ways in which gender and was part of, the negotiation of water resources in the communities. So I did some field work in these communities, and But actually Fonzamans was not one of those spaces. So I went initially anyway, I went to this Caribbean Water Network meeting, and Akila was there representing her community as an NGO. And I introduced myself to her. She seemed like an interesting person, so I introduced myself to her, and she invited me to come up to her community. And at the time I was living in Trinidad with my daughter, who was 2. And I think that that's important because that was part of my positionality. In the Caribbean, as in many places, your gender identity is defined in part through your largely through your social roles. And I was both an academic, I was an American, white presenting mother of a small child, single mother with a small child. And so I was invited to the community, and the first thing that happened was concern for my daughter. You know, I wanted to walk the land, but she was just a toddler and couldn't walk the land. So the first discussions had to do with somebody staying behind and watching her. And I was completely, I could say, you know, just overwhelmed by the beauty of the landscape, especially when I started to hear the story. And so for me, at first, it was a very visual experience that I wanted to deepen my understanding. But my first introduction, though, was not necessarily as those positionalities, but just as a human being who was felt a deep spiritual and emotional connection to that land, which I shared. Now, I'm a very forthcoming person, and I'm not someone who's hesitant to move through different boundaries and share, my goodness, this is so gorgeous, how did this happen? So the original conversation was a very interpersonal one. But then when and honestly, not an unusual one, because when many people come to that space, they have that response. And Fonzamans is also involved in cultural heritage tourism. So they give tours of their land. It's one of the ways their livelihood is made. And so my being there was something familiar to them. But when I proposed to learn more about the community, I didn't do it in a way where here I'm coming from the outside and I want to study you. It was through the lens of, do you engage already with the University of the West Indies? Do you have any connections with the Institute for Gender and Development Studies? How can we at the Institute help you achieve some of your goals? What are your goals? What are our shared goals? So from the very beginning, I didn't position myself as an outsider coming in to study others, which is the traditional anthropological way, but as a potential collaborator across academic and community domains in order to achieve a common goal, which is the elevation of women. Women foresters are rare. Akila has faced quite a bit of challenges in being listened to and being heard. There's also the history of Rastafari in the Caribbean, which, you know, we associate with the birth of Bob Marley, but there's been a lot of discrimination against Rastas, who are regarded as, you know, anti-middle class. You know, their critique of Babylon, of the Western capitalist system, has been a source of tension. Rastas were often pushed to the ground, their dreadlocks cut off by force. I mean, so there's been quite a bit of violence and marginality that community has faced, and so it's part of the objective. My objective as a feminist scholar and working with the Institute for Gender and Development Studies to really elevate the role of women who are involved in making decisions that are important about reforestation, about water access, land use, etc. So that's how I approached it. It doesn't mean that from the very beginning there were no sources of tension. When I proposed making this film, I really had to provide a rationale and a justification, and also a clear arrangement about profits from the film, because we sold it. It's still for sale on Good Docs. It cost a lot of money to make. I had to write a lot of grants. So how that resource, distribution takes place was made clear from the beginning. Who has access to it? Who can distribute it? It's a different form of distribution in the region than it is on the distribution site for those in North America and universities. So all of those issues, those power dynamics, came into play. And over time, also, I think the relationship has developed, and there have been many other aspects of research and shared sort of partnership beyond this film that have taken place. But that's how I approached it from the beginning, and I think that was really an important way of presenting myself, not as the top-down researcher who comes in to do research for one's own academic career.
No, thank you so much, Diana. This is really, really so helpful. And I know many of us are here who wish to explore different forms of innovative pedagogical and research processes of knowledge production and deviating from the usual mainstream ways. And I think these pointers that you shared, I think are very important beginning points of our research. I know we are almost coming to a close, but I don't know if there are anyone who would like to share a question or have any comments. Please feel free to unmute yourself and just share.
Also, if you want to turn on your cameras, I'd love to see whom I'm talking to.
Oh yes. Tanya, please go ahead.
I'm coming from it from a different perspective, but one of the things that I heard Akila struggle with was to respond to the dumping, garbage dumping and fires. And I also witnessed this here in Taiwan and also struggle to know how to process it. I think listening to your latest answer of kind of coming in and kind of thinking, okay, well, rather than focusing on that part, how can I support the people in the community who are working for that? I think you've already kind of answered that question of how I deal with that, because you can hear her struggling to find the right words. Like she doesn't want to say underdeveloped. She just says quiet, but I see a lot of that, and I don't know how to make sense of it or how to, because there's a part of it, I don't want to come at it from feeling that I know how to handle this better than the local community. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that and how, I don't even understand why, what was the source of the fires. I don't know if it was a deliberate attempt or a rebellion.
Right. Hi, Tanya. It's so good to see you here. Thank you for joining. Well, the source of the fire, there were multiple sources, and we took 23 hours of footage and narrowed it down to 23 minutes. So there were further conversations about the fires that came from many sources. Some came from people disposing of their garbage, in part because, and here's another resource management issue, because the state wasn't doing its job in terms of regular collection of trash, especially in the rural hill communities. So people would, dump and burn their garbage, and then and then that would lead to forest fires. But also in Trinidad, with increasing climate transformation. So there used to be very clear rainy and dry seasons, and those are not clear anymore. That's been happening for a while. Even back in the early 80s, you could see climate transformations. There are spontaneous fires because of great deforestation and dry and length of the dry season. Fires burst out on the hillsides. So there's that. There's people not paying attention to the rules when they're going camping, on lighting fires, all kinds of reasons for that. But the forest fires were really destructive because then when there were the rains, you had mudslides and flooding. And so that's been an issue that the community is trying to address. If you know, in many Caribbean spaces too, there's lots of dumping of trash, and coming from a place that Kemba Jaramogi spoke of, the daughter, Akila's daughter, she works, it's a family that is living there and working with the community. How can you litter? How can people do this? And dirty, you know, their beautiful space. That I think is an important question. You know, where does that come from? Why do people do that? And so if I were in your position, what I would do is I would look around and see what are the organizations that are working on this issue. There are inevitably community groups where there are some people who are concerned about the trash problem, the littering problem, whether it's a local environmental group or whatever it is, or whether it's the state trash collection service. There's got to be organizations that are addressing this, even if they're small NGOs or community groups. And then I would introduce myself to them, and I would say, I see that you're working on this issue, and that this is something I'm concerned with too. And what have you learned? And are you willing to share it with me? How can I work with you? How can we work together? So that's what I mean by when I say partnership. That from the and there are always going to be organizations or groups of people that are working for liberatory, emancipatory, progressive change. And it's the job it's our job to identify them, right? And not to come in as if this is our novel idea. You know, even if it's two people living, you know, or who are trying to create, you know, community consensus around this. So that's what I would recommend to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tanya. And I know there will be so many perspectives, so many aspects to talk about, because this is so powerful, so motivating, and so diverse as well. But I think we need to wrap up right now. So thank you so much, Diana, once again for being there. And sorry, the power just went off, so you see I'm sitting in darkness now. So thank you for being there, and all of you. Those who have been here, I know you have all joined from different parts of the world. Some would be very early, middle of the day, or very late, wherever you are located. But your support so much matters a lot. Thank you so much for these powerful engagements. And thank you so much, Diana, for being there and for this very powerful presentation, and so motivating and so practically empowering. Which is for me a sort of strong takeaway. It's not just about policies and propositions, but also how to practically implement them. And the documentary so much speaks to that crucial question. And I'm sure we would like to carry on the conversation on different platforms at different points of time. But till then, please take care, stay well wherever you are, and stay happy, and try to be with the greens and the nature as much as possible. Thank you so much. And take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.